We're going to finish the course by looking at some architecture from the 20th century with the goal of getting to postmodern architecture and hopefully using architecture to understand postmodernism, because I do believe it's in architecture that we can get our best handle on what postmodern is all about. We're going to start with an artist, an architect. We've already covered, his name is Frank Lloyd Wright, and this is his Guggenheim, which is located in New York City. It's 3141 in our textbook, and it's the last great monument that Frank Lloyd Wright did before his death in 1959. Wright, of course, is the leading American architect of the 20th century. He is famous for his organic architecture, architecture that's based on the forms in nature. And in this case, that is a snail shell. With the Roby House, we saw that his architecture can fit into the landscape. In this case, that does not apply. It is, however, still an organic building in terms of being drawn from nature. And the materials, even though this is New York City, the building is made out of reinforced concrete, and it has a kind of sandy, natural color to the exterior of the structure. It is Frank Lloyd Wright's only building in New York City, and I think that Wright claimed it was, in fact, the only building in New York City. Mr. Wright did not appreciate modern architecture. He did not appreciate the international style or skyscrapers, which we're going to turn to in a moment. It does, nevertheless, represent modernism and the use of modern materials, including reinforced concrete. It also represents a trend in the first half of the 20th century for architecture to be created that was sculptural in nature, almost looking like a piece of sculpture that's been carved rather than a monument, a building that has been created by an architect. It's also very simplified. At the same time, it's expressive, and perhaps more than anything, again, it is a sculptural construction. The photograph we have on the right, both of them, represent what the Guggenheim looked like before it was necessary to add an expansion for offices behind it. That has, again, like the Roby House, changed the view of the Guggenheim Museum and consequently has also caused controversy. The Guggenheim, however, has continued to expand and today actually has branches around the world. Many of those branches, the designs, have referenced back to Frank Lloyd Wright's original construction. This is a museum for modern art located on the 5th Avenue in New York City, and it gives us a long spiraling ramp with galleries off of that ramp, and we have paintings that are hung on the spiraling wall. It is a circular shape. There are offices in the rear. Paintings are hung on the spiraling walls, and there are 5 complete turns as you make a progressive route from the top to the bottom. It does widen, the spiral widens at the top. It is capped by a skylight dome, which is the light source. And we'll take a look at that design by Frank Lloyd Wright from the dome when we go inside. All of this is based upon the idea of a snail shell. Mr. Wright gave the rationale, and I think you have to recognize this is a weird shape for a museum. It did, I think, need Wright's rationale to explain it. He did say, well, it's organic architecture, and of course we know that already. Frank Lloyd Wright thinks that's good. But he also said you could write up very slowly, or excuse me, let me say that again. You could write up very quickly on the elevator, and then you could take your time leisurely to walk down the spiraling ramps. And by doing that, the visitor is going to avoid museum fatigue. Wright also argued that the slanted walls of his snail shell building resemble artists' easels. And, well, yes, easels are slanted, but nevertheless, despite Wright's rationale, there were some difficulties with the structure. It, at the end of the day, made a wonderful piece of architecture, but a very, very bad museum. It was necessary for changes to be made after the death of the architect to fix some of the problems. One of those problems included, in fact, the curving walls on the inside, which made it very difficult to hang large pictures because the pictures did not sit against the wall neatly. The paintings also sloped away, at least originally, away from the viewer, so the viewers ended up kind of leaning at the pictures, trying to see them. And on top of that, at that angle, the light from the skylight up above produced glare. There were problems with the structure, with the design, that did indeed make it not a very effective museum. One of Frank Lloyd Wright's students actually said that Wright did this on purpose because Wright hated modern art. Well, I think Wright probably did hate modern art, but I don't think he hated it that much. What I think is that Frank Lloyd Wright simply wanted to build a spiral building based upon a snail shell, and he finally got someone who agreed to pay to let him do that. Now that we have this marvelous building, we have to basically redesign it so it can be useful as a museum, and as some people have also suggested, why don't you just go build another museum? It is nevertheless an amazing monument, probably more of a testimony to Mr. Wright than it is to the artists whose works are displayed inside. Okay, this is an interior shot of Frank Lloyd Wright's ramps as he moves us ever so slowly down from the top to the bottom. As we go, we can engage in viewing along the walls. That's a bit of a glimpse into the skylight that Wright designed up above. Okay, and another view of Mr. Wright's monumental museum in New York City, the skylight that illuminates those galleried hallways or those walkways, creating a sense, I'm going to say a sense of motion and a continuing spiral energy, particularly as you are standing on the floor downward and looking up at the top and to the skylight. The structure itself has become a kind of refuge in New York City. It's often described as a place where you could go to get away from the sense of being in the city. The image that's on the screen right now is actually a painting, pretty darn good one too, by a photorealist whose name is Estes, and it is of the Guggenheim Museum before that expansion was built behind it, kind of altering the skyline surrounding the building itself. It is Wright's reinforced concrete clay colored building that seems to be growing and moving in organic fashion, and it does seem to be a place that perhaps doesn't quite fit into New York, but does provide a sense of escape from New York. It is a statement also to the continued originality of Frank Lloyd Wright and to his contributions to the 20th century and to creating an American spirit in architecture. Simplicity is also sought in the international style, but with more rigorously geometric forms. The international style is going to be the most influential style of the 20th century. It's going to be developed between the wars in Europe, and it is going to be promoted in the United States by architects who come here escaping Nazi control of the arts in Europe. In particular, two individuals, Gropius and Mies. His full name is Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, known affectionately as Mies. He's going to be particularly influential in helping to create the flowering of skyscrapers in the United States, which become the hallmark of the international style. These skyscrapers will be introduced into America in the late 40s, and they're going to blossom in the 1950s. Okay, the building that we're looking at right now is classic international style. It is figure 3146 in our textbook. It is the Seagram building. It is located in New York City, and it was constructed in the 1950s by two architects working together, Mies and a man whose name is Philip Johnson, another amazingly important architect of the 20th century. This style follows a formula that's going to very quickly become associated with corporate skyscrapers, which convey a sense of anonymity and privacy and power. The dark tinted glass on the windows gives a sense of discretion and dignity. There's also a cleanness, a clearness, and a simplicity to the lines of these buildings. They take up very small footprints because land is expensive. It allows the builder to go upward, to be very efficient in the use of the land, and to create a very easily standardized building. This is going to become what we would call the corporate look, and it's also ultimately going to strive for height. After after World War I, several European countries begin to develop this style at one time, and for that reason we refer to it as the international style. Now, I do want to remind you that in the early part of the 20th century, 1909 in particular, the era of the Roby House, Mr. Wright is going to go to Europe and bring with him some of his drawings, which will be published, so that Wright too is going to be influential in the construction of the international style. Influential in particular, I think, in contributing to a desire of opening up the walls. One of the elements of style is that the buildings do open up. They no longer, in a traditional sense, enclose space. They don't stress the wall itself. Glass now becomes the wall. It is held in position by the steel beams that take the building upward and provide support for the massive weight of the structure. The materials used, point two, are modern, and that does include steel, concrete, glass. So we avoid all of the traditional building materials such as wood and stone in order to create something modern, but also in order to create something that seems light, weightless, and has the power to soar up to the skies, creating prestige buildings that attain great height. These buildings are also primarily functional. They serve their purpose and do a little more than serve the purpose. They eliminate all ornament. Anything that doesn't contribute to the function of the building is not a part of the building. Our desire here is for something clean and clear and pure and rigorously geometric. When you look at buildings like this, and every city in the United States still has one, they look very, very machine-like. They are not particularly personal, and they're not particularly warm structures in the sense of being welcoming to the individual. The Seagram building is one of the best of these, and it is a style because it can be easily duplicated that lends itself quite quickly to become, I'm going to say, second-rate or perhaps even boring. The Seagram building is one of the best of these buildings. It utilizes the style while making the building itself remain light and elegant. The Seagram building is located in Manhattan. It is created in glass with a bronze-colored metal that supports it. This is steel, the metal. It is a kind of shaft, a building that goes upright on a plaza that is open. Because the architect was able to go high, he was able to preserve some of the land to create an open space around the building, and also a lobby at ground level, which is recessed. It's covered in glass, but it's open to pedestrians. It does two things. It allows the building to encourage people to come in, and if you want, you can add shops in here. It also, at the same time, makes the structure seem to be extremely light. These steel piers rising upward, however, are strong enough to carry the weight of the entire building and are not in any way lightweight. it allows the structure to become and remain dignified and rich and elegant and overall kind of classy, controlled building with a concrete and steel frame. It follows the mantra of Mies, which I think you should hear. And that is, this is what he used to say, should be the key to good architecture. And it is, quote, less is more. Okay, less is more. And hopefully you can see that in the design that the architect Johnson and Mies van der Rohe have given us. This is a shot, two shots on the right, of the three shots on the right of the open structure at the base of this that actually seems to go inward, allowing the building to appear to be light and to appear to be open, giving it a greater degree of freedom. And also you can see the plaza in front that allows it to be an open space in the city. Details, you can see the windows, the rows and rows and rows of windows, and you can also see the tinted glass that allows the space on the inside to remain very private and also very discreet. Okay. Whoops, there we go. These are additional views of the Seagram building. The one that's on the right is the traditional view that you get, and it probably matches what you have in the textbook in Gardner. As you walk around it, you begin to get more bundled shapes and more interesting, more variation in the shape of the structure. So that it not only is built with the purity of the international style, but it also has interesting qualities that enhance the vocabulary of the international style. A successful example of the international style without being a kind of cookie cutter copy of the international style.